West Belfast, early spring 1972. The nationalist housing estates, Twinbrook, Andersonstown, Ballymurphy, the Lower Falls, had been a war zone for 3 years. British Army foot patrols moved through twice daily. Armoured personnel carriers ground along the main roads. Helicopters swept in patterns that the locals had long since memorised. Internment without trial had been running since August 1971, and 1972 was shaping up to be the single most violent year of the entire Troubles. More than 10,000 shootings before it was over, a number that reduces to about 27 shootings every single day of the year. Into this environment, sometime in the early months of 1972, drove a green Bedford Commer van with 4 square laundry printed on its side. It came twice a week, regular as a milkman. It knocked on doors, it issued discount vouchers, numbered and colour-coded by street, so the handlers running the operation could track precisely which household corresponded to which address. A young man drove, a young woman stepped out at each stop, her accent fitting naturally into the community, her manner easy, her conversation the ordinary small talk of a service worker who comes around enough times to be familiar. She collected the laundry, handed back clean bundles from the previous week, and moved on. The service was cheap. The laundry came back folded and pressed. Nothing seemed wrong. For families navigating the daily pressure of army raids, checkpoints, and the grinding anxiety of living on a front line, the 4 square laundry was a small, reliable comfort. It was a masterclass in cover design. The British Army's Military Reaction Force, the MRF, understood something central to covert operations. The best cover isn't a disguise, it's a real service, with real customers, generating real goodwill. The 4 square laundry used an existing commercial laundry infrastructure as its backbone. Clothes were actually collected, laundered through a legitimate contractor, and returned. The discount vouchers, the twice-weekly schedule, the reliability of the pickup, these weren't window dressing. They were the operational core of the cover's durability. Customers trusted the van because the van earned that trust, week after week, on every estate it served. What those customers didn't know was what was happening inside the van while it sat at their curbside, and what was happening to their clothing before it came back clean. Hidden in the van's roof compartment and behind its rear panels were cameras and listening devices. Surveillance operatives concealed in the vehicle's interior photographed streets, noted vehicle registrations, documented who entered which houses, and recorded the rhythms of daily life on estates where a British soldier in uniform, arriving to do the same thing, would have triggered an immediate response. The 4 square laundry van was a mobile intelligence platform capable of penetrating neighbourhoods the British Army could only otherwise enter in force, in uniform, with everything that visibility cost them. But the cameras were, in a sense, the obvious component. The more dangerous weapon was the laundry itself. Before a single garment was washed, the clothing collected from nationalist West Belfast households went to a forensic laboratory. Technicians tested the items for traces of explosives, gunpowder, gun oil, and blood. The Military Intelligence Museum, an institutional source with access to the official record, states it without qualification. Once collected, the clothes would then be examined in a forensic laboratory for traces of explosives or gunpowder, as well as being laundered by a legitimate laundry service. Anne Foblacht, the Republican newspaper, documented the same method from the community's own historical perspective. Garments were also scientifically analysed for traces of blood, gun oil, gunpowder, and explosives. The forensic methods available in 1972 were primarily chemical spot tests for nitrates and explosive residues. A positive result on a piece of clothing could do several things simultaneously. It could scientifically link a specific household address to weapons handling. It could be cross-referenced against the British Army's existing intelligence files on known provisional IRA personnel. It could provide grounds for arrest warrants, targeted surveillance escalation, or house raids. And critically, unlike the word of an informant, which required corroboration and could be challenged in court, forensic residue on clothing was physical evidence, the kind that survives a courtroom. Every household that handed over a bag of laundry was potentially providing evidence of what had happened in their home. A positive result on a jacket worn during a shooting. Explosive residue on a pair of trousers from someone who'd placed a bomb. Gun oil that hadn't fully washed off before a garment went into the weekly pile. The operation collected that evidence from dozens of houses across nationalist West Belfast on a regular schedule from people who believed they were doing their laundry. For the months the van ran its routes in 1972, nobody in those households had any idea this was happening. The MRF that designed the laundry had been operational since the summer of 1971. Attached to 39 Air Portable Brigade, the British Army formation responsible for Belfast, it drew its doctrine from the counter-insurgency ideas of Brigadier Frank Kitson, who commanded 39 Brigade from 1970 to 1972. Kitson had studied the Mau Mau insurgency in Kenya in the 1950s. He wrote 2 books on the subject, Gangs and Counter-Gangs in 1960 and Low-Intensity Operations in 1971. And his central insight applied directly to Belfast. Penetrate the community, use local agents, run front companies, insert operatives into the spaces where uniformed soldiers can't go without triggering the very reaction they're trying to suppress. The MRF was the operational expression of that doctrine in an Irish urban context. Approximately 40 men, hand-picked from across the British Army, based at Palace Barracks in the Belfast suburb of Hollywood. The men operated in plain clothes, in civilian vehicles, armed with Browning pistols and Sterling submachine guns under their jackets. The unit's culture was aggressive to the point of recklessness. MRF teams conducted drive-by shootings in Catholic neighbourhoods, sometimes attributing them to loyalist paramilitaries to provoke sectarian conflict. They fired on people they couldn't confirm were armed. A Ministry of Defence review eventually found that the MRF had no provision for detailed command and control, a damning assessment for a covert unit operating in one of the most sensitive environments in Western Europe. One of its own members, interviewed for the BBC's 2013 Panorama documentary on the unit, described the philosophy in a single sentence. "We weren't there to act like an army unit, we were there to act like a terror group." Against that backdrop, the Foursquare Laundry was the MRF's most sophisticated asset. Patient where the unit's other activities were aggressive, technically grounded where they were improvised. Mark Urban, in Big Boys Rules, the gold standard British side account of the period, called it the MRF's most celebrated operation. It was. But even the laundry carried a structural flaw at its foundation. To make the operation work, to give it the local credibility that a genuine commercial service needed on nationalist estates, the MRF required people from Northern Ireland itself. People whose accents, faces and social mannerisms would pass without a second thought in the communities they were penetrating. The unit addressed this by recruiting turned IRA members. Provisional volunteers who had been persuaded or pressured to switch sides and work as double agents, feeding information back to British military intelligence while maintaining their Republican cover. Two of those men were Seamus Wright and Kevin McKee. Both were provisional IRA volunteers recruited by the MRF. McKee's relationship with the Foursquare Laundry went significantly deeper than most accounts acknowledge. According to declassified Ministry of Defence files, McKee had personally taken part in the Four Square Laundry operation. He wasn't a peripheral figure who had heard about the van through the grapevine of Republican Belfast. He was operationally inside it, present in the collection network that the IRA's forensic intelligence operation depended on, simultaneously reporting on it to British military handlers. That positioning made him extraordinarily valuable to the MRF. It also made his capture a catastrophic single point of failure. The MRF's assumption that these men would stay recruited indefinitely inside an organisation that viewed informers as an existential threat and hunted them systematically was the flaw that everything else was built on. The nationalist estates that the Four Square Laundry served weren't passive terrain. By 1972, they were one of the most saturated human intelligence environments in Western Europe, not because of the British Army's surveillance apparatus, but because of the communities themselves. These were tightly packed, working-class, predominantly Catholic areas where geographic and social boundaries were drawn with precision. Everyone knew every face on their street, every vehicle that appeared regularly, every pattern that had shifted. The IRA's D Company structure on the lower falls functioned as a kind of embedded community intelligence network. Company-level officers with granular knowledge of their own patch who came from those streets and remained embedded in them even as they were conducting operations against British targets. Strangers were noted. Unfamiliar vehicles were remembered. Anything that didn't fit the established pattern of daily life generated quiet, informal reporting up through a structure that was alert to exactly this kind of anomaly. The British Army understood this, which is precisely why the MRF ran the laundry as a genuine service rather than an obvious intrusion. But it also meant that anyone operating regularly on those streets was operating under a level of ambient community observation they couldn't see or measure. The van became a known quantity, trusted, expected, part of the routine. That trust was the cover's greatest achievement. It was also, when it collapsed, what made the collapse so complete. Brendan Hughes was born in June 1948 in the Lower Falls area of Belfast into an Irish nationalist Catholic family. He joined the Merchant Navy in the late 1960s, came home when the 1969 riots hit his neighbourhood, and joined the IRA the same year. He sided with the provisional faction in the 1969-70 split. By 1970, he was on the run in his own city, conducting operations against British Army and RUC targets while living under a false identity, moving between safe houses and keeping himself photographically invisible in a way that became definitional to how the British understood him. By 1972, he was the officer commanding D Company, 2nd Battalion, Provisional IRA Belfast Brigade. D Company covered the Lower Falls Road. Within the Republican movement, it was described as legendary. The British Army had a different assessment. Hughes was one of their most wanted men in Belfast, and they couldn't pin him down visually, even after major operations. That failure, according to an academic study of his life, reaffirmed his nickname of the Dark, a name that traced originally to his dark complexion and took on a second operational meaning through his ability to remain undocumented. He moved through the city's nationalist geography without leaving a photographic record, varied his patterns, changed locations, and maintained a personal operational security that stood in sharp contrast to the organizational aggression of D Company's day-to-day tempo. His own account of a routine working day during this period, preserved in the sealed Boston College interviews he gave to researcher Anthony McIntyre between 2001 and 2006, and published posthumously by Ed Maloney in Voices from the Grave, was delivered with an almost clinical casualness. You would have had a call house, and you might have robbed a bank in the morning, done a float in the afternoon, stuck a bomb and a booby trap out after that, and then maybe had a gun battle or two later that night. 5 operations in a day. Bank robbery, reconnaissance float, bomb placement, booby trap, gun battle. That pace, maintained across months of operations, requires an organizational security culture that isn't accidental. Informers are found, routes are varied, communication is compartmentalized. Counter-surveillance isn't a procedure Hughes would have described in those terms. It was simply how D Company had to operate to survive. On the 21st of July 1972, Bloody Friday, Hughes was the operational commander for the 22 bombs the IRA detonated across Belfast city centre in under an hour and 20 minutes. 9 people died. 130 were injured. It remains the single largest IRA bombing operation in Belfast's history. Hughes later told McIntyre that he felt genuine remorse about Bloody Friday, that there had been no intention to kill anyone that day, and that if he could do it over again, he wouldn't. The regret is real, documented, and on record. It's also a reminder of what kind of commander the MRF was operating against. Someone who planned 22 simultaneous bombings across a city, carried them out, and felt genuine remorse about the consequences while continuing to run D Company at the same operational tempo the following week. That is the figure who, in September 1972, received the intelligence that dismantled the Foursquare Laundry. In September 1972, the IRA's internal security apparatus caught Seamus Wright and Kevin McKee. The open record doesn't fully document how they were identified. The IRA's counterintelligence methods during this period were as closely held as the British Army's. What every credible account agrees on is what followed. Both men were detained and interrogated. Under interrogation, McKee told his handlers what he knew. He knew everything. He had been inside the Foursquare Laundry operation. He knew the van's routes, its twice-weekly collection schedule, the address-coded voucher system that allowed handlers to map which household belonged to which street. He knew that the laundry collected at each stop was being forensically tested for gunshot residue and explosive traces before it was cleaned and returned. He knew the hidden surveillance equipment in the van's roof compartment. He knew about the Gemini Health Studio's massage parlour on Antrim Road, another MRF front company. He knew about the MRF's city centre office at College Square. The power-based database, drawing on documented MOD files, captures the core intelligence directly. McKee told the IRA that the MRF was operating the Foursquare mobile laundry service in West Belfast. The Military Intelligence Museum's institutional account states the same sequence. The MRF's double agents had informed their PIRA handlers about the true nature of the Foursquare Laundry. What arrived in September 1972 wasn't rumour. It was an operational blueprint of the British Army's most sophisticated covert intelligence operation in Belfast, delivered by a man who had been embedded inside it. Brendan Hughes's response, as preserved in the Voices from the Grave account, drawing on his Boston College testimony, was immediate. He wanted to move. He was eager to rush in. A more senior element of the Belfast Brigade leadership applied the brake. Hughes pushed. They held. That tension is worth dwelling on, because it reveals something about how Hughes read the intelligence. He grasped the implications before anyone had confirmed a single detail. The laundry had been running for months. Every nationalist household that had handed over a bag of washing had potentially provided forensic evidence of weapons handling. Gunpowder on a jacket worn during a shooting, explosive residue on a pair of trousers from someone who had placed a device. The British were building a scientific database of IRA activity across the estates, one collection round at a time. The urgency wasn't impatience. It was threat recognition, an understanding that the damage might already be done, and that every additional collection round was compounding it. The senior leadership disagreed, not about whether to act, but about whether to act before the intelligence was independently verified. The IRA ordered surveillance. After McKee's interrogation, volunteers put the van and its associated premises under sustained observation. They tracked the Bedford Commer through Twinbrook and the surrounding estates, watching its routes and timing. They identified and watched the College Square office. They located and confirmed the Gemini Health Studios massage parlour on Antrim Road. Every detail McKee had provided checked against what the surveillance teams observed over the following weeks. The Wikipedia entry on the MRF, drawing on consistent secondary sources, describes this confirmation phase directly. The leaders of the Provisional IRA Belfast Brigade ordered that the companies immediately be put under surveillance. This surveillance confirmed that McKee's information was correct. That confirmation period was itself a tradecraft decision. The IRA wasn't going to mount a coordinated attack on British military assets based on a single source, however credible, even one who had participated in the operation firsthand. The surveillance was the verification layer. Weeks of watching before a single trigger was pulled. When the surveillance came back, confirming everything McKee had said, the van's routes, the timing, the associated premises, the same senior element that had told Hughes to wait started pushing for the operation. Hughes had been right about the urgency from the moment the intelligence arrived. He was now, with the picture confirmed, the man they needed to execute it. What the Belfast Brigade planned for October 2nd, 1972, wasn't a reactive strike. It was a deliberate, intelligence-led assault on the MRF's entire covert infrastructure in Belfast. 3 targets, 2 battalions, a single coordinated window of time. The 2nd Battalion, Hughes's operational territory, would attack the 4-square laundry van and the MRF city centre office at College Square. Simultaneously, units from the 3rd Battalion would raid the Gemini Health Studios massage parlour on Antrim Road. The Polish academic source on the operation, drawing on the CEEOL military history database, provides the clearest operational breakdown. 2nd Battalion IRA attacks the 4-square laundry van and the office at College Square. At the same time, members of the 3rd Battalion attacked the massage parlour. 3 targets, planned coordination, a single morning. Monday, 2nd October, 1972. Twinbrook Estate, West Belfast. Juniper Park, off the Stewartstown Road. The time, approximately 11:20 in the morning. 4 IRA volunteers were in position. 1 drove the car. 3 were the shooters. The green Bedford Commer came through the estate on its regular collection round. The same van that had been moving through these streets twice a week for months, building its customer base, collecting its forensic intelligence, pulling up to doorsteps where women handed over their washing without any understanding of what happened to it afterward. That morning, it came around its usual corner for the last time. The volunteers opened fire. Sustained, concentrated, contemporary Republican accounts describe machine gunning the vehicle. The fire was directed at the cab and at the roof compartment where surveillance operatives were believed to be concealed. The driver was Sapper Telford Ted Edward Stewart of the Royal Engineers. He was 21 years old. He had been assigned on covert attachment to the MRF, in civilian clothes, in an unmarked van, running collection routes through nationalist West Belfast. He was shot dead in the vehicle. The female operative wasn't inside the van when the shooting started. Lance Corporal Sarah Jane Walk had stepped out at a nearby house to collect laundry. When the gunfire began, the residents, initially assuming loyalists were attacking, took her inside and closed the door. She came under fire as the ambush developed. She escaped. She left the unit not long afterward. The casualty count beyond Stewart's confirmed death is where the accounts diverge. Republican sources at the time claimed 2 MRF soldiers had been killed. British sources confirm 1 fatality. The number of wounded varies across different accounts. Stewart's death is documented by multiple independent sources. What happened to other personnel, whether operatives were present in the van's roof compartment during the attack, how many were wounded, is disputed, and the MRF's deliberate institutional opacity means it's likely to remain disputed. About an hour after the Twinbrook attack, the same IRA unit raided the College Square office. It was empty. The 3rd Battalion's simultaneous assault on the massage parlour had mixed results. The laundry van, the MRF's most sophisticated and durable intelligence asset, was destroyed in a single morning. The Guardian filed the story that afternoon. Army laundryman shot dead. The Times ran it simultaneously. The existence of the Foursquare laundry, the forensic testing of civilian clothing, the hidden cameras, the address-coded vouchers, became public knowledge within 24 hours of the ambush. Wright and McKee didn't survive their exposure. The IRA took them to South Armagh, where they were executed as informers and buried in unmarked locations across the border in the Republic of Ireland. Their bodies remained hidden for 43 years. They were recovered in 2015 and became 2 of Northern Ireland's formerly designated disappeared. The term applied specifically to people the IRA secretly buried during the Troubles. Their role in ending the Foursquare laundry tends to get compressed in the telling of this story, reduced to a mechanism, a triggering event. The fuller picture is more instructive. McKee didn't just know about the laundry in a general sense. He had participated in its operation. He carried inside knowledge of the collection routes, the schedule, the forensic function, the personnel. When the IRA's security apparatus found him, it received the operational blueprint of the MRF's most sophisticated Belfast asset from a man who had helped run it. The MRF's model: recruit local agents, embed them in front companies, use their community knowledge to make the cover work, was precisely the model that created the circular vulnerability. The more useful an agent was, the more they knew. The more they knew, the more catastrophic their capture became. There was no way to design around that through better tradecraft. It was structural. The Ministry of Defence ordered a review of the MRF in November 1972. The review found, among other conclusions, that the unit had no provision for detailed command and control. A covert intelligence unit conducting multiple concurrent front company operations in one of the most contested urban environments in Western Europe had been running without formal oversight structure. The aggressive, improvised culture that had defined the MRF, "We were there to act like a terror group," in one member's self-characterization, wasn't incidental to the failure. It was the environment in which the failure became structurally possible. The MRF was formally disbanded in early 1973. Mark Urban's Big Boys Rules, drawing on British military sources with access that other accounts lack, confirms the timeline directly. The MRF was disbanded early in 1973. What replaced it was built on the lessons of what had gone wrong. 14 Intelligence Company, known as the Debt, a name that persisted across decades of memoirs, court documents and official descriptions, began operations as the MRF's successor, probably in 1973 or 1974. The precise formation date varies slightly across sources, but the structural differences from the MRF are consistently documented. Where the MRF had been a single 40-man unit concentrated in Belfast without formal command structure, 14 INT was organised into geographically dispersed detachments operating with significant compartmentalisation from each other. A North Belfast detachment, a South Belfast detachment, a Londonderry detachment. Each operated largely independently. A single exposure in one area, one turned agent, one blown safehouse, one surveillance team identified, couldn't cascade into the simultaneous destruction of the entire unit the way the October 1972 attacks had cascaded. One piece of intelligence from McKee had led directly to coordinated attacks on 3 separate MRF assets in a single morning. The compartmentalized structure of 14 int was designed specifically to make that kind of simultaneous collapse impossible. The operational methodology changed as well. The MRF had relied on turned IRA volunteers to provide the local credibility its front companies needed. Those men were also the unit's greatest single vulnerability. The IRA hunted informers continuously and systematically, understood their own organizational threat better than most formal intelligence services understood theirs, and treated the discovery of a turned member as an operational emergency rather than a criminal matter. When Wright and McKee were caught, everything they knew became everything the IRA knew. The MRF had optimized for effectiveness and paid for it in structural brittleness. 14 int built its approach around a different model. Longer observation timelines, deeper cover, a greater emphasis on watching targets from outside rather than penetrating their infrastructure from inside, and more rigorous compartmentalization of what any individual operative knew about the whole. The unit developed specialized training in long-term surveillance, tracking targets through Belfast over months before acting, building intelligence pictures through patient, sustained presence rather than embedded agents with full operational knowledge. Academic analyses of the transition consistently identify the Four Square Laundry's destruction as one of the primary catalysts for this rethinking. One study of the intelligence war against the IRA cites the laundry exposure as central to the debate about what British covert operations needed to look like going forward. The MRF's disbandment and 14 int's formation weren't organisational housekeeping. They were the institutional response to being outthought on their own operating ground by an adversary that understood the terrain, social, geographic and human, far better than any 40-man unit based in Hollywood was going to. Brendan Hughes died on the 16th of February 2008 in Belfast City Hospital. He was 59. His health had been deteriorating for years, partly attributed to the physical effects of the 1980 hunger strike he had led in the H blocks of the Maze prison. A 53-day fast he ended based on a British compromise he later believed had been misrepresented to him by intermediaries. Bobby Sands took over as leader of the Republican prisoners after Hughes began that strike. Sands started the second hunger strike on the 1st of March 1981. Hughes opposed it. His post-war biography is a study in political disillusionment. He had worked alongside Gerry Adams through the early 1970s. They were part of the same operational think tank that also included Ivor Bell, developing Republican strategy during the 1972 period. By the 2000s, Hughes believed Adams had used the peace process to secure personal political power at the expense of everything the campaign was supposed to have achieved. He said so publicly and repeatedly. In his Boston College testimony, he implicated Adams in the 1972 murder and secret burial of Jean McConville, a widow and mother of 10. Adams denied it. The allegations contributed to Adams's arrest in 2014, though no charges were filed. The Boston College interviews themselves became a legal battleground. Hughes had given them to Anthony McIntyre between 2001 and 2006 on the explicit understanding they would remain sealed until his death. The PSNI subpoenaed them in 2011 under the US-UK Mutual Legal Assistance Treaty. US federal courts ordered portions of the tapes handed over. The legal mechanisms of the United States didn't recognize the assurance Hughes had been given when he recorded them. What he had believed was a sealed historical record became, after his death, evidence in active criminal investigations. Not at the provisional plot in Milltown Cemetery. The exclusion was deliberate. A final position on where he stood relative to the movement he had served. The British Army believed a green van and a laundry service could wash the intelligence landscape of West Belfast clean without being noticed. The design was genuinely sophisticated, a real commercial operation with forensic testing embedded in its back end, surveillance hardware concealed in its roof compartment, address-coded vouchers generating a household database, a female operative building relationships on doorsteps across the nationalist estates. For months in 1972, it worked. It generated intelligence. It tested clothing. It documented the streets it rolled through. And it did all of this under the noses of a community that prided itself on knowing everything that moved through its territory. What ended it wasn't a brilliant observation from the street. Not a van that sat too low on its springs. Not a route that seemed wrong on a map. What ended it was something far more fundamental and far more instructive about the nature of the war being fought on those streets. The MRF's operating model required insiders, people who knew the community, the faces, the geography, the social texture that makes a covert operation blend in rather than stand out. The unit found those people inside the provisional IRA itself. Kevin McKee and Seamus Wright gave the operation its local credibility. They also gave it its single point of catastrophic failure. When the IRA's counterintelligence apparatus identified them in September 1972 and interrogated them, everything they knew, the van's routes, the forensic function, the College Square office, the Antrim Road massage parlour, became operational intelligence in the hands of the people who were now going to destroy all of it. Brendan Hughes's role in that destruction was real and consequential. He wasn't the man who caught Wright and McKee. That was the work of the IRA's internal security function, operating in the background of the story, the way counterintelligence units always do. But when the intelligence arrived, his immediate grasp of what it meant, that a forensic dragnet had been running through nationalist West Belfast for months, building a scientific case against households whose residents had no idea what they were participating in, drove him to push for action when a more cautious leadership told him to wait. And when the confirmation came back from weeks of IRA surveillance, validating everything McKee had said, Hughes was the operational commander who planned and directed the coordinated three-target attack that ended the MRF's covert infrastructure in Belfast on the morning of October 2nd, 1972. That is the story the Foursquare Laundry's failure actually tells. Not about a single act of observational genius, but about the limits of technical sophistication when the human architecture underneath is brittle. The laundry was clever. The forensic analysis was advanced for its time. The surveillance hardware was effective. The commercial cover was genuine. None of it could survive what the MRF had built into its own foundation. The reliance on men who had already switched sides once, operating inside an organization that had been hunting exactly those men since the conflict began. The MRF died in early 1973. 14 Intelligence Company was built from its ashes, more compartmentalized, more patient, more careful about what any individual operative knew about the whole, and significantly harder to destroy from a single point of failure. The doctrinal revolution that followed the Foursquare Laundry's destruction shaped British covert operations in Northern Ireland for the next 2 decades. It took a 21-year-old Royal Engineers sapper dying in a housing estate in Twinbrook to force that lesson into institutional practice. Sapper Stewart's family later launched legal challenges against the British Army related to the investigation of his death. The intelligence war the laundry was part of continued for another 26 years. Subscribe for more stories like this.